welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, and we have on the show with us today
Kyle Bullard.
Nice. All right, so Kyle and I haven't done an episode together in a while, so this is going to be pretty fun. Before we get into it, we'll do a little intro stuff. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so over at Spotify or iTunes or wherever you like your podcasts dealt to you. We would love for you to subscribe. It would help us out. The more people that listen, the cooler, more interesting guests we can get. So, or at least it's easier for us to get those. So anything helps. And if you want to help us with reviews, feel free to leave one at any of those sites. We'd love it. If you want to really support the show, we've got ebooks for sale, t-shirts, sweatshirts, all sorts of stuff over at psychedelicstodayshop.com, and a course called Navigating Psychedelics that we think is one of the top courses available right now on psychedelics. And it is very extensive. Will get you from 0 to 60, not in a few seconds. It might take a few months, but you will have a great knowledge set and be able to deal with real world issues around drugs and psychedelics and much more. Anything I missed there on Navigating Psychedelics, Kyle?
No, we have a bunch of master classes, so that's the exciting part about it. I think we have 12 to 14 different master classes, all on integration, self-care by some experts in the field. So definitely check it out. Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. Again, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com, or you can get there from our main website. And to stay informed on developments, we've got an email list you might want to get on. We've got all sorts of cool stuff coming in the pipeline really soon, sooner than we're comfortable with, but we're making it work. So if you want to get surprised first, get on our email list, and we'll talk to you there. All right, so let's get into it, Kyle. What have you been up to? We've not really had you on the show for a lot of the episodes recently, but what's going on?
Yeah, thanks for taking over on the recording end of things. My schedule kind of got pretty crazy once my internship started. Have been just doing my internship a few days a week. I'm working at a college in my town, counseling undergrad students on their life issues, trying to navigate what it means to become an adult and navigate the undergraduate years of their life. It's been pretty awesome. I've been enjoying it. It's a really cool site to be working at, pretty laid back for the most part. I mean, more laid back than some of my other clinical work of working with like early episode psychosis or at-risk teenagers trying to kill themselves or something like that. So not dealing with as much crisis, which is kind of a nice change. And it's kind of getting me, I guess, a little bit more associated with like what it's like to possibly be in a private practice. So it's nice. It's definitely, I think, getting me excited about the possibilities after I'm done graduating. So grad school is just kind of taking over my life at the moment, especially since internship has started. So it's been a difficult time trying to navigate scheduling podcasts. And so that's why Joe has kind of streamlined that process and taken it over for the past few months, which has been awesome. Thank you, Joe, for that. And then I've been working on a capstone project, and that's been taking up a huge chunk of my brain power, just constantly thinking about it, thinking how I want to organize it, and then actually getting down and writing it. So that capstone project, I'm almost done with it. I'm sure by the time this episode's released, I'll have submitted it. And a big shout out to Elizabeth Gibson and Alan Davis looking it over for me. Really appreciate that. And the capstone project is trauma resolution through breathwork. And maybe we can dig a little bit more into that a little later. But it's been an interesting process, and I think it's pretty solid.
Well, let's give it a little bit of time. So I think it's very interesting. At first, when we first started talking about it, it didn't click to me why it was important. But like we had talked about it a lot of times for a while. Like I think we started talking about it in the spring or something, maybe even earlier. So it's this new framework. Well, trauma theory meets a new framework and a way to involve breathwork in a clinical setting, maybe.
Yeah, so
maybe.
I obviously wanted to focus on breathwork for my capstone project, and doing it within the clinical mental health counseling program, it needed to have some sort of clinical application or focus. So all of our work with Dream Shadow and doing, I guess, breathwork in that self-discovery, personal development realm doesn't necessarily fit into the clinical model very much. And then as I started to look to see if there was any research for breathwork and like clinical applications in trauma, there wasn't much there. And so part of this idea came from, I was at the MDMA training, I guess that was back in 2016. And I was talking to Michael Mithofer about possible research in psychedelics. And he gave me a kind of an idea of like, you know, if you want to like really do some research or get involved, like figure out something that could be an adjunct to psychedelic therapy, and kind of go that route. And so I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, yeah, breath work. Like if I could figure out like a new way to work with breath work within that clinical capacity, like maybe it could be a pretty cool adjunct to psychedelic therapy. So, you know, the way that I was thinking about it was, I don't have any language, so I'm just making this up off the top of my head. I haven't formalized this part, but like an integrative breathwork approach. So integrative breathwork therapy model adjunct to psychedelic therapy. And so my idea was to create this framework of working with breathwork and trauma. And then hopefully I think it would be a pretty solid framework to then use in conjunction with psychedelics down the line, whether that's in a clinical setting or even just, you know, end up doing retreats or in a training. I think it could have a pretty useful application. And then so breaking that down, I was thinking about it like, you know, there's breathwork models kind of fall into the spiritual with the yoga traditions. And then you have some clinical applications. I think it's starting to become like more involved because some of the somatic work's coming out, and I'm digging through Bessel van der Kolk's book right now, Body Keeps Score. And he talks a lot about breathwork in there.
Which is an amazing book.
Yoga and Tai Chi. And so, you know, it's starting to hit there. But so, I mean, some of the research is like, you know, typically like deep breathing to calm yourself in like a therapeutic setting. But then you have the yogic traditions that are more in the spiritual realm. And then you have like something like holotropic breathwork or transpersonal breathwork that's kind of outside the scope of clinical. It's like more in the sense of like personal development, spiritual development. But I mean, when you think about it, coming from like the trauma theory, breath is really controls a lot of our functioning, right? It's what keeps us alive. And so there's different styles of breathing. You could have like the deep, slow belly breathing that can be really calming to the parasympathetic nervous system. It activates it, and it kind of soothes the sympathetic nervous system, which the like sympathetic nervous system is associated with like the fight or flight. So you get activated and you're kind of in like those high arousal states. Parasympathetic activation is associated with, quote, like rest and digest. So it's associated with calming the body down. And so deep, slow breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system and help calm down the sympathetic nervous system. So thinking about that, and then the faster breathing, which can be a little bit more activating, so it can bring emotions to the surface. And so the way that I've been thinking about breaking this down is how can you deal with trauma? You know, there's some people that that I've seen in breathwork sessions that, you know, maybe it could have been, they could have taken a few more steps before going into it. And the idea is like, you don't want to re-traumatize people in these bigger sessions. So how can you break it down for people that are like dealing with a lot of trauma, and how do you get them in their body first? So I broke it down to 3 different phases. The first phase is just like grounding and emotional regulation. So that's more associated with the the slow, deeper breathing, really focusing on the therapeutic alliance with the therapist. So you're just really building rapport at that first stage, and just really helping somebody get control of their emotions. So if they do enter like high arousal states or hypo-arousal states where they're kind of frozen, they're able to regulate a little bit more. Because if somebody is in that state, you can't just throw them into an activating, really big breathwork session. I just think it's somewhat counterintuitive.
And you want to kind of look at it as a spectrum, right? It's like some people with, 37 units of trauma could, quote unquote, I'm using that very loosely, could theoretically do okay in a normal breathwork session. But then there's the folks who will get there and just like either shut down or have an extreme reaction and need to get out of there. And it wouldn't be helpful, like you were saying, re-traumatize. So it's like, I've seen some pretty traumatized people do okay, but I wouldn't want to say everybody should do it.
Right, and I'm thinking like pretty significant like clinical severity on the trauma. I have people coming in. Well, I have one person that's coming in that like, they're just constantly looking around the room. They're kind of in like this hyper-arousal state. They're on edge. I mean, I don't know if necessarily throwing them into a 3-hour breathwork session would be like beneficial. It might be, but I think like since the trauma is so fresh, it wouldn't be that great. And that's something that we screen for, right? Like we're screening for like people that have had like a serious mental health crisis or spiritual emergence crisis within the past 6 months. So thinking about that, like how could, like, this is like maybe early on in somebody's like crisis or trauma. So working with that emotional regulation at that first piece and getting them grounded in their body. But I mean, we've seen people that have had significant trauma go to breathwork sessions and do really fine. And they work through a lot of it. But I think by the time they get there, they've already controlled some of their emotions, right? Like they've been able to somewhat be functional versus like somebody that comes into
the fact that they can get themselves there physically it says a lot, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Versus like in the clinical model where, or clinical setting where you might be dealing with people that are just got traumatized and they're kind of in a crisis mode. So how could you just use some slow breathing and body awareness and breath awareness to help them with their emotional regulation first, to get them in their body, get them grounded.
So clinical question around CAP scores. CAP scores being the unit, a particular test, right, that looks at the severity of someone's PTSD. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It would be interesting to do like a study around like if somebody with like a CAP score of 50 or whatever can hang out and do well, and somebody with a CAP score of 75 can't in a breathwork session.
Right.
That would be an interesting thing to observe. I know that's probably a bunch of years out, but for anybody out there that wants to go for it, please go for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much research within. I mean, they're starting to become more and more, but it's an underfunded area, I think, in mental health and psychology. It's just like researching breath work. So yeah, that's that first phase is just emotional regulation, getting somebody grounded, and just working with somebody to get them in their body. And then the second phase of this would be using breath work more in a somatic processing phase. So the way that I've been looking at this is it's kind of linear, but then once it gets to a certain stage, like it's not linear. I mean, you could incorporate these practices however you wanted to. But the linear part is just trying to get somebody regulated and grounded, and you kind of want to titrate these steps. And then the idea of titration really came from a lot of Peter Levine's work of like, you really want to titrate the trauma being released. You don't want to just throw somebody in there and have it all come out. So how could we work with smaller increments to slowly release it and work with it? So yeah, the second stage or phase would be, second phase, and then it has 2 stages. So kind of like a somatic experiencing where you're just helping somebody go in their body, breathe into these somatic sensations in their body and help maybe process it on the body level and physiological level. And then if somebody is like maybe a little stuck, you can start activating it a little more. So that would be like a second stage in that phase.
let's kind of dig into the somatic thing a little bit more,
Yeah.
because this might sound a little abstract to some folks.
Right.
So the way you and I have been talking about it based on the books we've been reading, it's like your body has this secret language almost that you don't necessarily automatically get to understand. It takes some time to get somewhat attuned to that and to understand what the body's trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you elaborate that
On like the
thing?
somatic sensations in the body?
Well, somatic sensations, and then how like a traumatic experience might be held somatically.
Right. Well, I don't have any training in somatic experiencing, so I'm guessing I'm using that phrase in just how I've been doing it.
We did read some books, though.
Yeah, yeah.
We read books by these people. It's not like we're totally rookies
Right,
here.
right.
But go for it.
So I guess the way
What do
that
you
I've
got?
been like working with that myself with breathing is just being able to like lay down and create a safe space for myself, maybe play some light music and close my eyes and turn a little bit inward and just be in the here and now and really pay attention to what's going on in my body. So just slowly breathing and paying attention to any sensation I maybe having. So like maybe there's some tension, like say in my abdomen, and what would it feel like to breathe a little bit into that space and be with it? What would it be like to move that space around, maybe stretch a little bit, or what would it feel like to place your hand on that tension in your body? The way that I work for myself is just to be curious about those feelings and start to try to befriend them, because there can be a lot of information there, and the breath itself can help you guide the experience and help you navigate through it. If something comes to the surface and it seems a little triggering or alarming for yourself, how could you use the breath to just calm yourself down and be able to explore it? We talk about that with like difficult psychedelic experiences where something comes to the surface. How can you use your breath to navigate through that space and kind of help control it a little bit? So yeah, the somatic, I guess, processing or experiencing is just really starting to tune inward and be a little bit more in touch with your inner experience and the inner sensations. And maybe those sensations is like, as you tune inward, maybe you feel a little bit of heat somewhere in your body, or maybe you feel a little bit of coolness in your body. Maybe there's tingling sensations or tightness. And so what does it feel like to be with those sensations and be a little bit curious and explore it?
Yeah. I think that's a good rough sketch there. And this is the kind of stuff that you get to learn sometimes in breathwork too. It's kind of just like, we'll encourage you here and there. Hopefully you can do it on your own, but in the beginning phase, look, this is what your body feels like. Check it out, experiment. It's not necessarily super programmatic, right? It's exploring.
Yeah.
Like it was interesting to hear you say linear, because it's funny in our world, linear equals bad
Right.
sometimes, but it's like, we should be able to calm down for a minute and go, okay, maybe I should lift 5 pounds before I lift 100 pounds,
Yeah.
So, let's, it's okay for some stuff to be sequential. And especially it's like, point A to point B, and then you're liberated at point B to a large degree. So.
Right. And I think like, maybe it's not linear, but just dealing in small increments, right? So it's just like kind of like a little step program where you're not just like, just jumping into the deep end. It's like dipping your toes in the water and testing the water out, and then kind of dipping your way in. And once you're comfortable, you can really start exploring it a little bit more in depth, instead of like, maybe you don't know how to swim and you just jump right in the deep end and you're just flopping around, or, so it's like, just taking those precautions and learning how to develop a relationship with your body. So then you can start to process some of these deeper inner experiences and emotions. And then, so I broke down that second phase into 2 stages, kind of like more along the lines of slow breathing, exploration, curiosity with the body sensations, being with it in the here and now. And then the other stage is more activation. So somebody just feels really blocked and they can't get in touch with some of that stuff. Maybe it would be beneficial for somebody to start breathing more fully and more open. So I actually did this yesterday with a client, and afterwards, they said, wow, I never really realized like I've just been like really holding my breath a lot. Like I feel like I was able to breathe a lot more. Like I feel more open now. Because before they were just talking really quietly. And I asked, I was like, do you feel really stuck in your body? Like is energy stagnant there? And they were like, yeah. I was like, well, let's try some of this deep breathing to see if we can activate that a little bit more. And throughout the rest of the session, they were much more open, more animated in their voice and the way they were describing things. So how could you use a modified version of transpersonal breath work where you're using music and some deeper breathing? And obviously when you're working in a therapy session, you only have depending on how you operate, anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour. And so obviously you're not going to do a full hour breathing unless you're scheduling longer sessions. So I think I did 10 minutes of deep breathing with this client, and that was enough to just open them up a little bit more to process some things. I think ideally maybe 30 minutes would be nice if they knew what they were coming in for. Do 30 minutes of breathing and then 30 minutes of processing. And then so the third stage or phase would be outside somewhat of the clinical scope, then stepping somebody into a full group 3-hour breathwork session, and the things that the type of breathwork that we like to facilitate, more in that realm of self-exploration. And then maybe also in that realm, you're dealing with a lot of spiritual issues or collective issues. So the things that can come up in that could be kind of collective traumas, right? So the first 2 stages, maybe you're dealing with a little bit more of the biographical personal traumas. And then in these bigger self-exploration workshops, you might be dealing with transpersonal stuff and all sorts of themes that you could be working with.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because it's almost like you're saying, okay, now you can swim, go swim and get stronger.
Yeah,
maybe. What's your opinion on regularity, in this kind of process? Say, you got them through the clinical portion of it, out of your office, and said, hey, why don't you go try breathwork? I'm still going to see you weekly or every other week, but maybe every 2 months, go do some holotropic breath work.
I mean, I think that would be kind of ideal, right? Still use the different smaller breathing techniques within that clinical space and do traditional therapy or somatic therapy, but then hopefully refer them out to these larger groups, which then they're developing connections and group process as well. And so I think that's a huge part of healing from trauma as well, is developing relationships. A lot of people in the neuroscience realm and the somatic realm talk about relationships being the healing. The mind or the brain is a social organ. The reason why we've survived over years was be able to create social connections and talk and communicate. And so, so even working in that clinical space and then getting somebody hopefully a little bit more engaged with their community. And, Elizabeth and Lenny always talk about the community aspect of breath work and how that's, I don't know, for me, always going there, it's been a huge community thing. It's oh, these people understand, and I finally kind of get to hang around with people that kind of get it. And that in itself is healing. But sometimes people that have been severely traumatized, they have trust issues, they can't make connections, and it's really hard to do that. So how could we work with people more in that clinical space to develop trust and then get them more involved in their community or this group process thing? Yeah.
And regarding the Gibsons, it's more than just the Gibsons themselves, right? They've over the decades have cultivated this kind of very interesting community of folks who, there's a similar theme to their interests. There's some people who are still Catholic, I'm sure. There's some people who are still involved in other religions, but overall they have an interest in psychology and growth and in their own personal process, and that relationship with others that gets deepened over the years is just the extra special valuable thing. It's kind of something we're trying to develop online and in person too, right? how can we be the people that help cultivate community too? Because without that, it's really hard to heal.
Yeah.
Isolation is pretty rough.
And I think it's an issue nowadays, right? Even though we're so connected with the internet and social media and all this, a lot of people say we're so disconnected actually in our physical lives.
Have I ever talked to you about the bandwidth thing?
I don't think so.
Bandwidth and communication. So the concept of bandwidth?
Yeah.
28K modems, 56K modems, and we're at cable and fiber optics now, and 3G, 4G, 5G cell networks. It's great, and video communication's great, right? Like Skype is awesome, but relative to being here in person, where like this is 2D, right, on Skype, and on the phone it's kind of 2D. It's like amplitude and tone, but so I guess maybe it's 3D on Skype, then amplitude, tone, color, and 2D image here. But when you get in person, your depth of field kicks in, for people with two eyes, and you're able to see a lot more body language, the subtleties of facial muscles and all that kind of stuff, and intonation, perception of intonation might even be better. So it's like a higher bandwidth communication medium on person. Like you can imagine just texts. Like texts are so bad and so often like very misinterpreted. Like it's kind of a joke in our generation to like see people freaking out. Some love interest sends you a message, and then you start like sweating because you don't know how to interpret what they said.
What do they mean?
Are they angry with you? Do they love you? Yeah. What do they mean I'm going to the park? So, all sorts of stuff like that is really stressful to us. So we have this like hyper connection of low bandwidth, as opposed to like using our full bandwidth that we would use if we were living in a 150 person village,
right?
And like fully enmeshed in that, like 10 generations deep. It's a very different deal. I don't really even know my neighbors' names, which is a big deal. Like, I should probably learn them. I've been thinking that for a while.
You guys were
I know
talking
some of the
about
people's
that
names
when I was out there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, community, like actually bringing the human organism back up to its normal capacity and what it expects, as opposed to this like isolation and quiet and like weird usage of the dopaminergic system from social media. Yeah, there's room for improvement. I guess that's all I'm really saying.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Consider bandwidth as part of the equation. That's all cribbed from Robert Anton Wilson. That's not my idea. Probably also from somebody else, like the guy. There's this guy that gave Tim Leary a lot of coaching at one point. Not a lot, but a little bit. Marshall McLuhan, the guy that was really involved in. Fuck. I wish I could speak to that intelligently right now. I'm not there.
Okay.
But he talked a lot about how media works and communication works. Media theorist, we'll call him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about him.
What have we missed on your capstone?
That's about it. So I broke
all?
it up into two parts. The first part of it is just an overview of somatic psychology and trauma theory and incorporating those, the work of like Dan Siegel, Peter Levine, Bessel, Vanderkirk, and a few others. And so just understanding how trauma affects the body and the mind, and how, trauma just influences, the limbic system and does all this wacky stuff to us. And that, there are techniques and we do have an understanding on how we can start to get control over it all over again. And then the second part is, this breathwork framework and kind of putting together this framework on how you could use breathwork in a clinical setting and then outside of a clinical setting to hopefully help resolve trauma and work with trauma in a new way.
What I've noticed, Kyle, and I think we've talked about it a bunch, is it's really interesting to me that therapists, they get taught clinical, practices, right? But they don't necessarily get taught much about like theory and practice of trauma, which I was very shocked. because I'm like, I think this is the essence of what we're trying to heal in a lot of cases, but why are they not taught this even in their graduate programs? It's coming, right? Like there's all these conferences going around. A lot of these names that you just mentioned are doing like big conferences with folks like Gabor Mate involved, and getting a lot of attention now. But I think if folks want to be of service to the psychedelic community, if you're doing like underground facilitation or above ground facilitation, might be very worthwhile to spend some time trying to understand trauma through people like Peter Levine, Mate, Vanderbolk. Is that right?
Vanderkolk.
Vanderkolk. Sorry, everybody. But that's the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I think he's got a couple other books that are really great too.
Yeah, and I think some curriculums are slow at adapting, but I think a lot of the newer neuroscience is helping us understand how trauma affects the brain. So it's also just a sign of the times and the technology that we have and the research that's going on. So, I don't know, the school that I'm in, I'm actually taking a trauma resolution course right now, which is great, and it's actually one of the biggest classes I've ever been in, and
that's optimistic.
I mean, yeah, it's wonderful. We're going through all this stuff right now, which I'm kind of a little bummed about that I couldn't take this course prior to writing this capstone. So I'll probably end up going back after I submit it and kind of update what I've been learning in this course as well. So this is just like a first product. I'm sure it will end up turning into multiple different things after I'm done with it and go back and do a few more edits and whatnot. But yeah, it's been
I think it's amazing.
Been consuming a lot of my brain power, so yeah, I've been a little bit on the back burner, but it will be done hopefully soon. Hopefully, I'm submitting it on Sunday this week, and then we'll be done with grad school in May, and then I don't know what the future of psychedelics today holds for us. We were just out. I was just out in Breckenridge with Joe. I think we talked about it a little bit in an intro on one of the episodes, but I mean that was great. We got a lot of great brainstorming done, and trying to figure out what's next for us.
A little bit of snowboarding. I wish we got more snowboarding in. I actually have an injury, so I couldn't really do too much, but next time, for sure. But yeah, like pages and pages and pages of notes, and spent a lot of time with Marissa here, which was awesome. She's super smart and very helpful on a lot of these ideas, and we even got like a little photo studio thing set up, which I think a green screen's coming soon to my future.
Nice.
But we'll see what happens.
Have there been
maybe let's go ahead.
I was gonna say, have there been any like interesting things on your end, or any things that have been popping up in the psychedelic world that's been of interest of you recently?
Well, yeah. We don't have to get into it too much, but there was the MAPS recently publicized this breathwork workshop. It was all online. He's a certified breathwork facilitator that chose to facilitate breathwork on the internet, which even though there was criteria, like safety criteria, like, okay, yes, you can come if you pass this stuff. I just feel like there was some risks exposed. It's not necessarily that it's quote unquote dangerous. It's that there are risks, and it's hard to really divulge those risks to people appropriately. Like, you could have a manic reaction. You could have all sorts of reactions, even like a cardiac event. No one's there to really help you out. So that was a little funky. There's big debate on the Psychedelics Today Facebook group. So just Psychedelics Today group on Facebook. We'd love to have you join us if you haven't joined us yet on there. So we get into it. Ville-Marie Narlock, who works for SSDP and a few other places, talked about it a bunch. She actually went through and told us what she liked and didn't like, and that's all detailed in there. So that's one thing. Also, we'll talk generally maybe here, but I don't know. Whatever you want to do. This concept of like, we find out about a lot of things that are dangerous in the psychedelic world or potentially harmful, and like our relationship to coming out about that stuff is really tricky. Like, I don't really know what to do often. Yes, we're quote unquote journalists, but that said, we're journalists with no money for legal defense in the event of a situation coming up. There was one comment I'd love to get some lawyers to help us out here, but one comment was like, even if it's true, it's not libel if it's true, but it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can survive a lawsuit, even if it's a fake, made up lawsuit, right? Like, it's a complicated set of situations, and some people were really aggressive with me about just saying it. Like, oh, I'm so sick of this shit. It's like, well, come on, you don't understand the full story, clearly. If it was that easy, I would just say it. But there are risks that can come my way. I do feel responsibility, though, for safety in the community. So I do feel like this conflict of like, am I going to go bankrupt from a lawsuit? Am I going to save a life? Maybe yes, maybe both. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that generally?
It's an interesting time in the psychedelic world, that's for sure. Sometimes it feels like the Wild West now that like things are starting to emerge and more people are getting involved. And I think since there is somewhat of a lack of education around certain things, it's like maybe people aren't making the best decisions because, they're just reading articles and just kind of want to jump right in without getting educated first. And I don't know. Yeah, it's tricky to navigate this. I think we're kind of all in it together in some sense of like, how are we navigating all this? And when we do hear unethical stuff arise, how are we dealing with it as a community? And like, is it our responsibility to speak up and to call people out against certain practices? Sometimes it's like, wow, yeah, we could save some lives if that's the case. And yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky conversation, and I definitely agree with you. It's like,
and we could go extinct, right? Like we could go extinct from the internet for at least a little while if those people with all that money from inappropriate practices goes ahead and does something, right? It's really ugly, and I don't necessarily have faith that we would survive it. I wish that was true. Survive it in terms of psychedelics. Say I'm gonna physically exist, fine, but what does that do? Like, we've put a lot of time and effort in here into serving the community, and we don't want to just see that go away. We would love to build on what we've done so far, and not see it eroded. Maybe that's selfish, maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't see too many other people throwing themselves on swords, but there are those folks out there. There are folks taking really serious risks. I know with a lot of the sexual assault stuff, it's actually really professionally dangerous often for women to come out about their stories. And physically also, like the number one leading cause of death of women, I think, is men. So it's like, it's scary. It's not okay, really, often for women to come out. But it's kind of the thing we're dealing with. So we are trying to understand our future, folks out there, and how we can best serve the community and continue to best serve the community and not put ourselves in a bad spot. We are gonna hopefully be talking to some lawyers soon about some of these stories and like what's safe, what's not safe, and hopefully we can do it and keep you all posted. If you want to dig into what we're actually talking about, come again to our Psychedelics Today Facebook group. There's a lot of conversation there and debate. I'm on there almost daily. Kyle's on there pretty often too, and we're a little over 1,200 people at this point on there. So it's getting good. There's a lot of really valuable discussion, and I think a lot of people are finding community, and it's not just another one of these Facebook groups that gets spammed all the time. I delete stuff pretty often that looks like spam. If you want to get on other Facebook groups, you can do that there and get those notifications there. It's just not going to be ours. And I try to keep it a safe space too. So if people get a little aggressive and don't stop, they're gone. So it's a safer spot. I'm trying to keep it that way. So come join us.
Thanks for moderating that.
Yeah, no worries. I sweat a little bit about it, and I haven't cried yet, but someday I'm sure. So what else? Is there anything else on that topic we wanted to dig into? Right? I think that's probably sufficient.
Yeah.
I know that's really vague, but there's a lot more details on the Facebook group, guys. If you go there, go for it and learn.
Yeah, I think as we're trying to navigate this, maybe we'll be less vague over time and whatnot. So yeah. What else has been going on?
Let's talk about the books.
There's been some cool research that just got published, I believe, out of Europe somewhere. I forget, about LSD in the mind.
The LSD?
What it's doing in the brain.
Yeah.
So new neural imaging that just came out, which is pretty interesting.
I tried to read it, but couldn't get very far.
Yeah, I skimmed through it. Again, lack of time has been an issue for me, so I skimmed through it, and it sounded pretty interesting. It was making me think, like, what was the difference between this study versus like the Carhart-Harris study, and it seems like LSD does something, or they found like other mechanisms outside the default mode network, which is pretty fascinating.
They called it like molecular mechanism, I think, which is really interesting. I'm like, okay, the molecular mechanism behind LSD action. And it was interesting that it wasn't talking directly about default mode network stuff, which the Carhart-Harris work pretty much exclusively had talked about. Curious stuff. Do you have the title of the paper?
Not off the top of my head, but I could probably find it and pull it up. Probably should have done that before we started recording.
Scientists think they finally figured out how LSD alters our brains. This is from sciencealert.com. It interrupts a major circuit between 4 parts of the brain, including the thalamus, which acts as an information filter. Essentially, the drug allowed more information to flow through the thalamus to other parts of the brain. Now that we have a better understanding of how LSD affects the brain, researchers believe they can use that information to study disorders that produce the same effect as a drug, such as depression and schizophrenia. Quote, "We are getting nearer to understanding the complexity of what happens with LSD in the brain," researcher Katrine Preller told The Guardian, and that is particularly important if we are to develop new medicines. So KATRINPRELLER. And again, that's from sciencealert.com. Scientists think they've finally figured out how LSD alters our consciousness.
Yeah, and
that's actually a pretty good, I like that. Extra information flow through the thalamus.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then if you want to dig up the original article, it's on pnas.org, and the title is "Effective Connectivity Changes in LSD-Induced Altered States of Consciousness in Humans." And it was just published January 28th, 2019.
Great. Yeah. What else is going on? Let's talk about our books, Kyle. We've got a book that I think we're going to be selling on Amazon really soon. 2 books, actually.
Yeah.
The Trip Journal and Integration Guide, both of which have been and still are available on our shop in a digital version. But Kyle, you just opened your proof and you're pretty impressed.
I did. We aren't doing video,
Skype.
but I can show you, Joe. Yeah.
Oh, that looks awesome.
I just got the proof in today, so it does look pretty great. We got a physical copy for our Trip Journal and Integration book. We had it redesigned from our old design. Looks a little bit cleaner. And so the Trip Journal is just a way to track your trips. There's some coloring things. There's a little bit of harm reduction information in here. And yeah, there's just a lot of different journaling activities, ways to track your experience. So setting intentions, understanding what your beliefs are behind these experiences, what's your relationship to the different substances, any philosophical or spiritual beliefs about it. And then there's 3 sections in here where, you can track your trip. We have a little checklist of different things that to remind you how to prepare. So, I think we break it down into I'm flipping the pages right now. So we have some of the essentials, such as, making sure you have water, comfortable clothing, healthy snacks, important phone numbers of people you might need to call, a test kit, pure intentions, turning off your cell phone or putting it on silent. And then we have a nice little checklist for recreational settings, self-discovery setting, and shamanic setting. And some of these things on the items overlap, and obviously you can kind of, these are just ideas. These aren't things that you need to have in these settings, but just ideas and reminders for some people. Recreational setting, don't forget your festival toys or light sticks. For the shamanic setting, maybe you need some Palo Santo sage or a feather for smudging, some rocks, tobacco, And then we have a place where you can draw. You do a little mandala after your experience and just track it down. I'm really excited for this physical copy. It's really cool to actually have this in my hands right now. So yeah, we'll probably get that up on Amazon within the next few weeks. We just need to do some final edits and whatnot, and it'll be up there for you to purchase. So there's the trip journal, and then we have an integration journal. And the integration journal is just a combination of journal entries and just questions and activities. So like tracking your dreams, and just a lot of different things. It kind of can have a linear
helpful
approach where it might
quotes.
be like I forget how many weeks I put in there, 5 or 7 week activities. So like, and it kind of has this theme of planting seeds and nourishing the seeds. So, you can have this flower bloom, which is the seed being your experience, and how do you plant that and really tender to it, and hopefully see something manifest after your experience. And so, yeah. So stay tuned for the physical products. And we'll have, the ebook as well if you want to download the digital copy.
Yep, that's available in shop for about $10 in digital. And I bet we'll have a Kindle version and more soon as well. Let's talk about Arizona. We've got 5-10 minutes, but let's chat a little bit about that. There's Arizona Psychedelic Science. Is that what it's called? Arizona
Psychedelic Conference.
Let's just call it that. In Tempe, Arizona, which is pretty much Metro Phoenix. It's right next to Phoenix Airport. It's where the university is, ASU. And the conference is at the Naturopathy School in Tempe. Ray and Amanda are putting it on. You'll probably hear more and more about them. It sounds like they're going to be really active in the space going forward. They, I think, learned about us through our activity trying to activate Phoenix by putting on, group meetups. And I got to do that breathwork workshop at ASU, Arizona State in Tempe, a few months back, and people liked it. So, got to meet Ray, and I said, hey, let's do a breathwork workshop at the conference. So we're actually doing 2 breathwork workshops. It's sold out, so sorry for giving you FOMO, but 34 people, I think, signed up for our breathwork workshops, and there's going to be some interesting presenters too. What's standing out for you right now about it? I'm just really excited to meet all sorts of new folks. It seems like a very different conference.
Yeah, I'm just in the same boat. I'm excited for the breathwork workshop and just to be able to meet people, connect. I think sometimes I go to these conferences and then just end up I really like connecting with people. So I think that's the thing I'm most excited for. I know we will be kind of at a tabling. So hopefully we can switch on and off if there's a cool talk that we want to get into to check that out. And I'm leaving, I think, Sunday morning, so I'm not going to be there for the whole conference weekend, but I'll be there for Friday and Saturday.
Right, and I'll be there all day Sunday. So come say hi. Love to chat. There's a lot to talk about. We should probably bring some cough drops and stuff, because our last time, I think in Oakland, we talked so much that like our throats were just like gone by the last day. It was just nonstop. Actually, I think even when you were out here, we were talking so much. It was like, oh my God, So dry. How am I going to talk tomorrow?
And it's already dry up in Breckenridge.
So, yeah, right. Drier in Tempe even. So it's going to be exciting. If we get some free, well, I don't think we're going to have any free time, but there's like a number of really cool things in the city we should check out. I think we should just do some like of our own breathwork workshops in Phoenix in the future too. We've got all sorts of friends that just want me to do it like every few months down there. So might as well.
Yeah.
Just got to figure all that detail
We also
out.
have another cool conference that's coming up in March that we're going to. It's a philosophy conference. I forget what the title is, but it's about exceptional human experiences.
The question.
I think is the correct term nowadays.
Exceptional experience, yeah. So the question the conference is designed to answer is, or at least ask, is can exceptional experiences save humans? The implications from ecological crisis. So we've got a number of people: Peter Schwarstedt H., Dennis McKenna, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson,
Daniel McQueen,
Becca Siegel, Rebecca Tarnas, Matt Siegel. Who else? Johanna Hill.
And then Daniel McQueen and
I think Carla might be coming, right? Carla Clements from the MDMA trials.
And then a bunch of philosophy
Travis Cox from Naropa.
folks, so John Cobb and John Buchanan. John Buchanan was Lenny's advisor, I believe, or is that John Cobb? I always get them.
John Cobb. John Cobb's the quote unquote dean of American theology, which is really interesting. He's kind of like the top guy on Whitehead in the world. He's also 90 something years old. So, but one of the sharpest minds I've ever seen. I saw him at a conference a couple years back, and he was doing incredibly well given his age. And John Buchanan's friends with Lenny and Elizabeth. I think he's really, really. I think he actually certified with Groff in Breathwork, and I think he works in Hollywood or something. I don't really know too much about him, but really nice guy. Got to meet him.
Unfortunately,
at
Groff
the same
couldn't
college,
make it.
Claremont.
He was on the invite list,
right?
But it should be cool. Like Joe and I are going to be going out there, documenting everything, taking notes, and some of the proceedings, I believe, is going to be part of somewhat of the foundation of Dream Shadow, and the breathwork training and whatnot. So. Yeah, and I think that's like what makes Dream Shadow stand a little bit apart is the philosophy aspect, rooted in Whiteheadian philosophy and process thought. Mm-hmm. Is that the correct terminology? Process thought or process philosophy?
Both are good. So it's tricky, right? It's like you look at certain religious texts and stuff, and it makes it look like you get somewhere and that's it, like you're finished. It's like, it's more like life is a whole process. Death is a process. Death is inextricably linked to the process of life and everything else. There's so much to process thought. I think permaculture aligns really well to it because you're thinking in arcs of years. Like a chair is not a chair. A chair is like the trees that went into it, the land that's now barren because of that, the slow decay of the chair back into earth over the course of 100 years. It's, it's the process of becoming and decaying from being that thing. It's really an interesting philosophy, and to McKenna, this is my line that I always say. McKenna said he was the most, Alfred North Whitehead, who founded this branch of philosophy, is the most psychedelic of the philosophers. And Lenny goes, yeah, but Terry, he calls him, never really understood it. So it's like I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's, very interesting to hear people who are really deep in their field critique McKenna, because McKenna's so convincing that you're just like, sure, got it. You talk to some mathematicians, sure thing, your time wave is right. But so, it's just interesting. But it's really fascinating that his brother's going to be there. Dennis is going to be there, involved in this, deep philosophy and conference of practical philosophy. And so it's a private conference. We should say that. Nobody can really come. There might be a public moment on the Sunday. We should probably see if there's a website for this thing. And it's at Pomona College Pomona or Claremont in
Claremont.
I guess the town is called Claremont, California. Claremont, California. It's 2 towns west of Rancho Cucamonga. You might know that from the TV comedy Workaholics. It looks like there's some stuff here online. So if you search "Can Exceptional Experience Help Save the World?" You'll find some stuff about this conference. And we'll keep you all posted. That's happening mid-March, I think, mid-March. Early March. Yeah. Kyle and I have so much going on, it's hard to even keep track of our schedules. So that's going to be a really fascinating thing and a really interesting growth opportunity for us, because we can kind of do gonzo journalism meets interactive philosophy and record stuff that you would never, ever hear at a psychedelic conference.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
This is more philosophical. And we're not going to talk about the architecture of the universe as revealed to you by the toad gods, but more, given our current state of knowledge in science, what can we do with philosophy? And a cohesive philosophy that's not just going to leave us at the end of emptiness, like a lot of philosophy tries really hard, but it ends up being really, nihilistic and solipsistic almost. So this is not that. Like, you hear us say lines often like, I am the totality of all of my relationships. I am not just like me and my human being. Like, if someone in my village is sick, like, part of me is sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we're going to take this, if we're going to survive on Earth, we're going to be a little more global. And, people are sick out there. How do we heal? And how do we heal ourselves? And, we're all part of this spaceship. We're inextricably linked to the spaceship that we're traveling through space at high velocity on. And it's, there's limited resources on this thing. So how do we all get what we need and stay happy and healthy? And, that's kind of, to me, like a lot of these questions that we're answering in psychedelics.
Yeah. And can these exceptional experiences help us get more in touch with that and hopefully have some sort of consciousness shift to help us, I guess, get more in touch with spaceship Earth, right?
Right. It's not how to make Microsoft more money. It's how do we understand who we are, where we come from better, and where we're going, and all that kind of stuff. The big questions. So let's wrap here. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope there was some value there for you. More coming soon on all of the stuff we talked about, especially those books. If you want to support us, please leave us, $2 a month on Patreon or more. There's a lot of great rewards on there, like discounts to our current and future classes and a lot more. We've got t-shirts and sweatshirts for sale. They're amazing, like American Apparel kind of quality. And I think we're going to try to get some new designs going really soon. So stay tuned, keep watching, and leave us a review. Or just reach out to us. Let us know you like what we're doing. We need encouragement to keep going. So if you love the show, you could just email us too. And we would love to hear from you. Psychedelics Today, email@gmail.com. Anything else, Kyle?
No, thanks for listening. And we'll see you on the other side.
Yeah, see you on the next week. Joe Moore, Kyle Buller, signing off for Psychedelics Today. Bye-bye.